can all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. All right, good morning, everybody. How are you all today? I just said to Travis, there's already 5 more people here than I would have expected, knowing every year the beautiful Pride Parade makes it a little difficult for parking. But I'm glad we're all here. Be nice if we were all out there, but we're here, so we will sit here. So we appreciate you being here as well. I think for me, I guess just what sits with me right now as I sit down, and a few more people may trickle in, and to everybody here on YouTube, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Feel free to say good morning and hello and introduce yourselves. I think it's opportunities like this when you look at Buddhist teachings, and for me, the practice of the paramita is always what's prevalent in my mind. The Bodhisattva practice of looking at generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, and wisdom. These 6 practices, and trying to determine how do they play out in our lives. And when I look at this event, a day like today, to celebrate, and I think about morality and the teachings of morality, which for me really boils down to, in my practice, looking at honesty, things we think, things we say, things we do, how honest they are, how ethical they are, how moral they are, and also just honesty towards yourself, meaning like, okay, how am I really? There's the image that we present to people. There's the image that we want people to see. And then there's what's actually going on up here in our mind and in our heart. And there's very often a huge gap there. It's really in simple things like just putting on our clothes. We don't necessarily think about it, but we pick out our clothes with some idea in mind of what we want to look like. And this is not a suggestion that this is bad or wrong. We all do this. But it's just a simple, everyday, real-life example of reminding us that we are constantly wrapped up in some attempt to project an image of ourselves in some way. And when we begin to recognize this, then we can say, all right, if that's what I'm doing with simple things just like clothes, where else does this play out in my life? And so it creates an opportunity to say, what do I honestly think and what do I honestly feel? And very often we don't want to express to people what we honestly think or what we honestly feel, because maybe we'd be ashamed, or maybe we'd be embarrassed, or maybe we'd be sad, right? And so coming back to the practice of morality and being honest with yourself, part of this practice, and again, just coming from personal experience over the years, knowing what I was like growing up as a child, knowing my views as a child, and into my teens and 20s, being able to look at that honestly and say, wow, Jeff, you were really not a good-hearted, good-minded person. You had a lot of racial tendency, a lot of biases, a lot of views towards people that really were not so great without even knowing it, just based on how and where I was raised. And so honesty is looking at that and reflecting on that and saying, okay, this is how or who I was then, but is that how or who I am now? And to me, this is the cultivation and evolution of practice. What I mean by that is practicing loving kindness and compassion towards self and others. But really coming back to being honest with yourself and saying, do I really think this way when I see people? Do I really judge people this way when I see people? And can I change that? And this is a really difficult practice, right? But it's necessary. And I think, I don't want to assume or guess anything about anyone here, but I'd be pretty comfortable saying that most of us, as we go through our day, see people and judge them. Well, let me break it down, especially with a small little group here. Is there anyone who goes through their day and sees someone and doesn't judge them at all? I just want to give you all a chance before I start, assuming we're, people who roam around all day judging and critiquing people, right? So we do this all day long. And the judgments are different for each of us based on our experiences growing up and how we were raised and where we were raised and what we were taught. Our judgments of people are different, but they're still judgments. And the question is, how can we move beyond that? And that's something that this really taught me to be aware of, be mindful of, and then continue to work on it and cut through it. And ask ourselves, why do I think this way of somebody just because they're wearing a certain shirt? Or why do I think this way of somebody just because they're in a certain car? Or why do I think this way about someone just because of who they spend their time with? Why do we do these things? And when you begin to explore that, it's pretty eye-opening and pretty shocking. But I think it's, again, really important to start to break that down so we can ask ourselves, why are we doing these things? And the last thing I'll say on this is when we recognize this occurs in ourselves, when we recognize that this judgment of others occurs in ourselves, and it could be, again, I keep using the shirt example, but it could be as simple as we're judging somebody for the shirt they wear. When we see that we do that to other people, what this allows us to do is begin to have an understanding, not necessarily agreeing, but an understanding of other people who also pass judgment. And then when other people judge us, instead of hating them immediately, we can begin to understand that they have judgments just like we do. And from there, we can start dialogue and we can start breaking down anger and ignorance that exists in so many people's minds and hearts. Because there's a lot of ignorant people out there who think it's wrong to love who you love. And if we hate them, we can never come to an understanding and move forward. then that just stays in a cycle of hate. Let that anger, let that frustration, let that sadness, let that heartbreak motivate us to create change. But if we allow it to bring hate in our hearts, then we're just stuck in hate. And that's what we want to work out of. So I know it's so simple, it's so easy, but it's not. It's difficult. And it is a lifelong practice. So with that, I'll pause and we'll start with a meditation practice. A couple things to tell you before we begin. For those who may be new or sitting for the first time, nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. Your mind won't shut off, won't think nothing. Don't judge your thoughts. Don't critique them. Don't expect them to stop. They're just going to continue to race. We will recognize the racing mind and then work on coming back to present moment. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. However you're sitting, just trying to push stomach forward slightly, allows the back to straighten, shoulders are relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap, whatever is comfortable. I will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important, do not expect anything, but to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed, if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return to breath. Letting go of expectation. Letting go of judgment from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, in the mind, learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. Most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And know that however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's not from the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed. stressed, anxious. We began to understand the relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where we come from, what we believe in, and where we think we're going, our whole life is filled with things that happen. We react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. That's what we get. This practice is learning to respond to something quietly, peacefully, and still. For most of us, the way we responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how we respond to every other 20-minute period of our day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap where the way we feel now is closer to how we feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to us in our respective lives. With a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not easy. This practice is not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often we might think it is. It's direct perception into the present moment. And very often that present moment is incredibly difficult and painful and challenging. And so this practice is learning to be with life as it is. Recognize our thoughts, our words, our actions, and how what we do impacts our life and the life of those around us. And once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything and everyone around us, and we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life begins to change. But it takes time. And as I spoke about earlier, I think the opportunity to really explore the nature of our own minds is an incredible gift that I believe often gets overlooked because we're in a kind of a culture and a way of life that we just get so wrapped up in going so fast and trying to achieve and accomplish and do so many things. And I'm not suggesting that that's not important or of value in our lives, but most of us weren't raised to make sure we take time to just allow ourselves to settle. And if we allow ourselves to settle, we begin to see a little more clearly. There's a beautiful, in Zen practice, there's a beautiful metaphor of a vase. And you have this vase and, rocks and sand and pebbles and everything in it. Let's assume it's clear water to begin with. And all of a sudden we pick up the vase and we start shaking it. All right? What happens if you have a vase with rocks and sand and pebbles and water and you start shaking it? What happens to it? It gets all cloudy, right? So that's us very often running around through our days. Kind of cloudy. Now what happens when we set the vase down and step away a little bit? Clears up. It settles. Now, the important part to understand about this metaphor is that what was in the vase when you were shaking it and what was in the vase when you set it down, still the same. It didn't go away. The container didn't change. Everything's there. But we stop messing with it. And when we stop messing with it, it allows things to settle and clear up. And for me, that's a great metaphor. And when I say messing with, it's just my expression. I don't mean good or bad, but we're often just trying to do something. And this practice is really about settling. And when we settle, it clears up. And then we're able to see what's the true nature of our mind. And I believe the true nature of our mind is very beautiful and kind and gentle and loving and accepting and embracing. But when we're all shook up all the time and it's foggy and we lack clarity, then we respond more from just short-term emotions and triggers and traumas and experiences. So I'll pause there. And for me, really just prefer to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice. So we use the rest of our brief time this morning, and I'll just respond to what you're sitting with. And again, everyone on YouTube here, welcome. Nice to see you all. Feel free if you have questions. There's a chat box there, as you see, somewhere on your screen. So feel free to type questions in there as well. And I'll do my best to respond. Some thoughts, questions?
You're talking about, I guess, just the judgment of other people. I think for me, I use it as a defense mechanism.
You say what? A defense mechanism?
Yeah. You know, like, I'm just, like, I guess I just tend to always, I try to look at the glass half full, but I tend to see so much violence and so much, like, need to be aware of my surroundings and put a judgment on everything. So I'm aware, I feel comfortable. What's I guess a good practice to try to get away from doing that, you know? I mean, I don't want to be judgmental. I mean, I'm not perfect. I know that. I know I have a lot of things to work on, but, you know, I really, it's something I definitely struggle with.
Yeah, so to try to rephrase that, just so I understand, mainly so people joining us virtually can hear the question, and also so I understand it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you asking is, as I spoke about earlier with judgments, you often use judgments as a defense mechanism. And you know you're not perfect, but you recognize that there's a lot of violence and things going on in the world. And these judgments, you didn't, I don't think, say it this way, but this is what I'm hearing, is in your mind, these judgments allow you to create a safe space for yourself.
Yeah.
Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
Okay. And you didn't say the last part about creating a safe space.
No, but that is what, you know.
Yeah. I heard what you said, and then I automatically translated it into.
Not the great at expressing myself, but yes, that's what I meant.
Say that last part again, sorry.
I'm not the great at expressing myself.
No,
That's what I meant.
Yeah, no, you were great. So yes, great question, great realization. I think it's important to recognize that. So discernment is important. Okay. My understanding and what I've learned from the Buddhist teachings is that every moment of our lives requires judgment. For example, I know that if the stove is hot and I put my hand on it, what's going to happen? I'm going to get burned. So there's no wisdom in not having a level of judgment, discernment, all of these things that are required to know that that stove is hot. Stop touching it, right? So me discerning the heat that's coming from the stove is protecting my hand from getting burned. Very important. But in that discernment, there's no anger or hatred towards the stove. Well, I guess after it burns us, we're not happy with it. But ultimately, the ones we shouldn't be happy with is ourselves, because we're the ones who touch it. The stove was just doing what it does. The stove gets hot. That's why it's there. So we have to know, stop putting our hand in there. That keeps us safe. The real question is for you to continue to explore, again, not necessarily an answer to this, but when we, as you say, judge a certain place or thing or situation, is that judgment coming from the intention of trying to be wise and compassionate, right? If you see lots of violence and, people shooting guns that way. Recognized wisdom would say, I probably should not walk closer, right? I mean, as a civilian, right? Unless you're a police officer, then you might want to go engage, okay? But as a civilian, you would say, I'm going to discern the situation. The wisest thing for me to do is remove myself from it without judging what's going on, without passing judgment, right? So I think the question for you to say is, we are very often so good at justifying in our own minds why we do certain things. So you have to ask yourself, what's really going on when I'm trying to create my safe space? Is it because I feel like my hand's going to get burned or I'm going to get shot? Or is it because I'm really just afraid of being real? And nobody would know that, obviously, except for you, for us as individuals with each decision. So discernment, judgment, two different things. Critique also, I kind of put on that judgment category, and these can be towards ourselves as well. A lot of times we have judgment towards people where safety is not an issue at all. It's just we're viewing people and we are judging or critiquing them, but it's not about safety. And often it is. Does that make sense? Easy to do?
No, not easy to do.
Not easy to do.
But I know what you're saying, yeah.
And we've conditioned ourselves our whole lives to create a perfect little bubble around us. Yeah. Again, growing up, I had to look at justifications for things, rationalizing, and what am I just being ignorant about? And that wasn't fun, because then I had to call myself out on my own ignorance. That's a lot of fun. And after you do that for about 4 years, then you can break through it. Yeah. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You talked about morality and doing the right thing. How do we know we're doing the right thing?
That's a good question. So the question is, you talked about morality and doing the right thing. How do we know that we're doing the right thing? Always a great question, because in Buddhism, and are you newer to Buddhism? Yeah. So in Buddhism, it's not like other religions where we're being judged, and then someone's going to judge you and say, good, heaven, bad, hell. Buddhism doesn't work that way. Buddhism revolves around the teaching of karma, which is not what goes around comes around. It's not getting what you deserve. Karma is action. It's what we think, what we say, we do. This is what the Buddha taught us, the 3 ways we generate karma. Body, speech, and mind. So how we physically move through the world, right? Our thoughts and our words. Thoughts, words, and actions. So the question of how do we know what's good is a couple ways to look at this. One, I like to start with exploring what is the intention behind what we think, what we say, and what we do. Have you ever been really selfish and greedy?
I'm sure I have.
Once in your life, I'm sure, years ago. Remember that one day? Right? So that one time years ago that you were really selfish and greedy, you knew it. Yeah? Have you ever been really generous and kind? Probably every other day. And when you're that way, you know that? So usually, we're pretty clear in our own hearts and our own minds with our intention. Is our intention to benefit just me? Like it's all about me. I'm greedy. I want to feed my craving, my ego. You ever done anything just for your ego? You ever done any things that are selfless? You know the difference. This is really getting at what the question is. I don't like to look at Buddhist teachings as good or bad, or right or wrong. That's a very Western way, religious way of viewing our actions. I think it's healthy to begin to understand that all of our actions, body, speech, mind, all of our karma means action, has a causal relationship, meaning all karma is the law of cause and effect. So when we do things that are not all for me and are a little more selfless, in most cases, in many cases, what's the outcome from that? Pretty pleasant. When we do things that are all about me and selfish and greedy, what's the outcome for others usually? Unpleasant. So, does that make sense so far?
Yes.
It's really all about the intention. Now, I will say very specifically, when the Buddha addressed morality, he does have very clear teachings on this. I just like to start with the first part because I think that's, especially for someone who's brand new, it's much more practical to look at what is the intention behind what you're thinking, saying, and doing. And is it all about benefiting you, or is it also about benefiting others? And it doesn't mean that you can't benefit or be happy or pleasant. It's not about like torturing yourself just to make the rest of the world happy. That's not it, right? But morality, for example, in Buddhism, they're called the precepts, okay? And what he taught to monks and nuns, and this is 2,500 years ago, 500 years before Christ, he taught precepts to the monks and nuns that were the original Sangha, the original community practitioners. And he created anywhere from 227 to 311 precepts. And these were, I hate to call them rules, but they were like rules, a code of conduct. They were guidelines to follow. But they were guidelines there to keep the community safe and healthy. And the metaphor I like to use is, do you drive?
Yes.
Okay, so when you come to a red light, what do you do typically?
Stop.
Stop. Do you have to stop?
I mean, yes.
No, not I mean. Do you have to stop at the red light?
Yes.
Let's try this again. Do you have to?
Well, no, you don't have to.
Well, that was my question. The question was, do you have to stop at the red light? No. There you go. But you choose to, right?
Right.
So you don't have to stop at the red light. You choose to stop at the red light. These are two very different situations. Why do you choose to stop at the red light?
For your safety.
For your safety and
Safety of others.
safety of others, and well, that kind of sums it up, right?
Yeah.
For the safety of ourselves and others. We don't want to get tickets. What also could happen if you go through the red light? Accident, or hurt someone, or death, or ticket, or what could happen if you run a red light?
You could get to your destination faster.
Thank you very much. Somehow I knew you would know the answer to that question. You know? You could get to your destination faster and no one was harmed. Lots of options when you approach the red light. We choose to, and automatically, which is why, I mean, I've done this literally 1,000 times, this example, and it is so hard for people to process in their brain that stopping at a red light is not something they have to do. They do it because they've been so conditioned their whole lives, or at least since they learned to drive, to stop, or even as a child you learn, right? But we choose to. So it's become a way of being. Precepts are the same things. You don't have to follow any of them. But often people choose to, because if you follow them, less people get hurt. It's really that simple. The first 5 precepts, and I'll just kind of touch on these quickly, that the Buddha taught to the monks and nuns, and also as lay people, when you take, let's say, like a formal precept ceremony, and you take a vow to take these precepts, the first 5 precepts are to refrain from, and this goes into the morality part, right? To refrain from lying, from harming, often translated as killing, but it's really about harming, right? Which includes killing, because killing causes harm. But to refrain from lying, to refrain from harming, to refrain from stealing or taking what's not ours, right? to refrain from sexual misconduct, and to refrain from intoxicants or anything that alters the state of mind. So if we just look at these 5, again, I'm not necessarily going to break them all down now because that's a whole nother kind of topic and requires a lot more time. But when we lie, when we harm or kill, when we take what's not ours, right? When we use intoxicants or things that alter our states of mind, and when we have sexual misconduct, the likelihood of us and others hurting from all of these things is pretty high. So the Buddha taught as morality, be honest, don't kill, don't steal, don't take what's not yours, right? Don't cloud your mind with a bunch of stuff that makes you do stupid things or pulls you further away from true nature of reality. I know where you're going, we don't have time for it. Go ahead.
I was wondering about like the Zen monks who drink and have orgies.
Say again?
I was wondering about the Zen monks who drink and have orgies experiencing spiritual ecstasy. Does that fit in?
They're not monks. Very different.
What are they?
People and priests who are not following precepts. Very simple. Here's the beautiful thing. My mistake. I thought you were going to go the psychedelic route, but I'm glad you moved beyond that. Here's the thing. Let me finish this thought. Does that make sense so far with like morality and the things that we do? So if we spend our time and we're actually honest with people and ourselves, and we don't take what's not ours, right? And we put these things into our lives, then we suffer less and others suffer less. Important to understand that throughout your day today. I remember years ago at Downtown Temple, we did a summer group, and we did a precept ceremony for all 5 of them, or all 5 precepts for the whole group. And one guy showed up the next day, and he said it's been like less than 24 hours, and he already broke all 5 precepts. He found himself doing an anonymous medical form, anonymous, and he was lying on it, right? What it shows us is how hard it is to actually do these things. And what I often challenge people to do, not from a judgment standpoint, this isn't about like, oh, I'm a terrible person because I lied today, or oh, I'm a terrible person because I had 3 beers. This isn't a judgment, it's not a critique. It's a recognition of, if we use drugs, if we use alcohol, if we're constantly drinking, if we're constantly getting high, if we're constantly escaping, there's not necessarily a problem with the alcohol or the drug itself. The problem is what? Why are we using it? What is it that we're running from? So the precepts are really there, I think, to help us deeply explore ourselves, right? And I often challenge people to take one of them. You don't have to share your results, right? This doesn't have to be an open study. But say, no lying. And just see, can you go through the day today and not lie? Anyone think that would be easy? I see a yes, I see a no. And somewhere in between, right? Already we're honest. We started off on a good track, right? The honesty about these things. And then no harming. So just pick one. No harming, no lying, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no intoxicants. Pick one a day and try it. And be like, wow, that was really easy. Or, wow, that was really difficult. Right? And when you get at the end of the day and you realize, you were going to try not lying, and all of a sudden you realize you lied like 37 times in that day, don't go to sleep angry and pissed off at yourself for being like a bad person that you lied. Recognize, wow, I lie. I should work on this. So, helpful? Yeah. So back to the you're talking about Zen priests or Zen monks or Zen people.
Reading Caraway's Dharma Bomb's book.
Yeah.
Very soon to that book, he kind of mentioned about the Zen monks who were drinking in some holy spiritual ecstasy state.
Yeah.
Free love. Sex.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out where that plays in.
It doesn't plan at all. At all.
I've seen that around other religions too, and it has to be deviation, right? But there's also Hindu tantric practices too, and I didn't know that maybe was an offshoot.
Yeah. So the tantric practice is very separate, but let me talk about the first part. I'll make this super simple. In Buddhism, and this will like maybe shock people who might have this like grand image of Buddhism being this like pure thing. People who practice Buddhism, monks or nuns, or priests or lay people, are what? People. They're human. They're not Buddhas. They're not fully enlightened beings. They're humans. And in Buddhism, just like every other religion, you have abuse of power. You have abuse of drugs, alcohol, sexual relationships. You have all of that stuff. It's in Buddhism as well. And so for anybody, not just you, Ryan, but for anybody who thinks that like, oh, there's a whole history of all this abuse in other religions, and I'm into Buddhism because it doesn't involve that, all of that stuff is there, right? There's a whole history, present day as well, of abuse of power, toxic masculinity, a tradition in America that's become way too many just old white men leading Buddhist stuff, which is really terrible. All of that stuff is in Buddhism as well. So you have all that history. And it's important to understand that these people who do those things doesn't make it right, doesn't make it good. Right? I remember the year that I was in Taiwan, and one example I gave for a long time when I came back was that, over there, you have a cab driver driving around and there's a Buddha hanging on the dashboard. Doesn't mean that cab driver does everything the Buddha says. You come here to the West, you have cab drivers with the cross hanging on it. Doesn't mean that cab driver does everything Jesus says. So my reminder to everybody is don't elevate Buddhism as being this like thing that's better than. It is a body of teachings from one human 2,500 years ago that then people will do what they want with it and call it Buddhism. But yeah, if you're doing all that stuff, it's not Buddhist practice. And if it's in a Kerouac book, it's almost definitely not Buddhist practice. So, yeah, definitely. Yeah. All right. Anything else before we close? All right. We'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace and free from suffering. May any merit gained be transferred to all more than 6 million people who've lost lives during this pandemic, their family and friends who suffer, all those in Ukraine and surrounding areas who suffer, those who've lost lives in the shootings in Texas, the children and adults in Chicago as well. May they all be at peace and free from suffering. All right, just a few quick announcements. Thanks all for being here. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma bum. We opened up this temple about 15 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those of us who lead, we're not monks, we're not nuns, we're not gurus, we're not masters, we're not teachers. We're just practitioners doing our best to take our understanding of Buddhist teachings and put it into terms that hopefully make sense to those who show up. So every night we have different practices going on, different people leading teachings from different Buddhist traditions. Family Sangha has started again. They actually met out at the lake today just because we knew parking would be impossible in the area today. We have a recovery Sangha that meets a handful of times a week, so anyone battling addiction, drugs, alcohol, or anything like that There's classes going on as well. And other than that, yeah, it's just great to see you all here. And my apologies, Ryan. I saw your hand go up as soon as I said the intoxicants, and I thought you were going to jump to the psychedelic question. And I was like, oh, I don't have time for that right now. It's too long a one. But I appreciate you all being here. Happy Pride to everybody. It really is a beautiful day, and I'm sorry I'm not out there, and we're not out there today right now. But it's good to be here with you all. So thank you all, and